Welcome back to the Cozy Cottage Homestead. Today we're going to be making English cottage bread. Homemade bread, cheaper than buying it at the grocery store. This was the book that I used the recipe from. We have some already sliced up. We will be using this for an open-faced sloppy joe bread. Sure is going to be delicious. Please stick around and I'll be showing you how to make homemade English cottage bread. Today I'm going to be sharing with you a recipe that I found in one of my bread books. The name of the book is Simple Ways to Make Healthful Bread. Great Natural Breads Made Easy. Really simple recipes, very good, very healthy. The recipe calls for white flour. I'm going to be using half whole wheat and half regular white flour. And the name of the recipe, go figure, English cottage bread. Seems very simple, very easy. Says that this is a stiffer type of bread. So I'm thinking tonight for supper we're going to have open-faced sloppy joes on our homemade English cottage bread. So we're going to get started. Let me grab the water out the microwave because I did heat it up in the microwave. You can use a thermometer if you would like to see if the water temperature is right. I usually just use my finger and I can pretty much tell if it's right. You want it like a baby's bottle, kind of warm. So you can even test that on your wrist. If you're unsure of the temperature of the water and you're a beginner, just use a little thermometer. They make them for cheese and candies and different things. Very inexpensive. So the first thing we have to do is put our 2 cups of water in a bowl and 2 tablespoons of yeast, and then you want to stir that up until it is completely dissolved. And I have some glass bowls, but they're not big enough to make the bread in. So I may think about getting some glass bowls, because sometimes my husband is out working around the homestead and doesn't try to disturb me too much when I'm making my videos, so that I don't have to keep zooming in and out and moving the camera around, so y'all can kind of see what it looks like. But we'll see. We'll take it one day at a time. The important part is whenever I'm kneading the bread. So really this is kind of simple. You're just mixing it up, the yeast, into the warm water. Make sure that there's no lumps so that you get it all dissolved. I just push it on the side of the bowl if I find a lump. Making sure you rub the bottom and all the sides really good. And I know this is very simple for some of you, but I also realize that there are a lot of new beginners that's just starting to learn how to make bread, that's never made bread. So just bear with me. I tend to want to give as much information about working on stuff or making stuff as I possibly can, to give you all the information that you need so that your bread will turn out just right. So now we're going to need 4 cups of the flour. This is all-purpose flour, and I'm going to use half wheat, which I'm going to start out with 2 cups of wheat and 2 cups of the white. I just refilled all my canisters, did a little rearranging in my little pantry storage area. So I save all of my flour in the bags, and then I have it in my 5-gallon buckets so that I can get out like 4 or 5 pounds at a time. I usually can get close to 5 pounds in each, and I know that's going to be exactly what I need, so I'm just going to throw it in there. And that is our 2 cups of the wheat flour. So I'm going to go ahead and move this out the way. This was my overflow. I think I took something else its place in one of my canisters. We were off and on using the wheat flour. So, but making bread I like to use 50-50. So go ahead and give that a stir. Instead of just throwing the 4 cups in here at one time, frugal tip, if you add it a little bit at a time, it makes it easier to mix everything and incorporate it all together. So now let's go with our 2 cups of our all-purpose white flour. This is 1/4 of a cup, so I have to do this several times and not lose my count. That's 1 cup. And I believe that's 2 cups. I think it's 2 cups. Alright. Go ahead and give that a stir. I guess when I go back and watch the video, I'll realize if it was right or not. Kind of hard to talk and count at the same time, huh? Definitely a bunch of talkers in our family. My dad used to always tell us, all of us kids, I don't know how y'all have so much to talk about. I don't usually have a lot to talk about unless I'm explaining something or sharing something. Most of the time it's just me and the dogs, and my husband's off doing whatever he's doing. And I don't really talk a whole lot. I just quiet in my thoughts most of the time. But when I'm sharing something or telling a story, y'all know I'm long-winded. I'll go ahead and tell you everything I can. Okay, so now we have that mixed up really good. Let me see if y'all can see that. It's getting really thick. So now it says you want to add the 2 more cups of flour. So that's why it didn't really matter if I had the exact amount right or not, because I'm going to add more. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 1 cup. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now the recipe calls for 6 to 7 cups. Baking is so much fun. See, that allows for errors. If you need it to be moister, you just add a little more flour. If it's too thick, you just add a little more water. Now I'm going to go ahead and add my salt. It called for 1 tablespoon of salt, but I'm only doing 2 teaspoons. I feel like that's plenty enough salt in our bread. Okay, so now we're almost to the point to where we can keep mixing it, but we're going to have to throw it out on the counter and knead it for a little while. And then that's when the fun part comes in and all the hard work comes in. So go ahead and try to mix it as much as you can in the bowl. First, scraping your sides because you're going to use the same bowl to oil it. So after you get done working on your bread, you're going to let it rise, the first rise in the bowl. I'm going to have to work this just a little bit in the bowl to get it to the point to where I can get it out on my counter. Let me move some of this out of my way. We have to leave our flour there because we're going to need to flour our surface. Sorry. Have to clean up this little bit of, there was a little bit of moisture there. You don't want any moisture on your surface area where you're working because you want to be able to work with the dough without it sticking. Let's just leave this right here. Usually is one right here. I don't know what to do with it. Okay. So now we're just going to start working with our hand. Just punching it down. Once I get it to come together a little bit, I'm going to move y'all closer so y'all can see the kneading process. There's not really any right way or wrong way to do it. Working with bread and working in a bakery whenever I was younger, I did learn different techniques that seemed to help. And then it's just like anything. Sometimes we just have a knack for things. We all just do things our own little way. So let me go ahead, flour my surface, and get this ready. I'm probably fixing to pause y'all for a minute and move y'all closer so y'all can see what it looks like. Alright, I hope that's a good angle for y'all to see the kneading the dough part. Just go ahead and clean out that bowl as best as you can. You want to go ahead at this point, go ahead and get some oil and oil your bowl, because your dough is going to be resting in there for about an hour the first time, and you don't want it to stick to the bowl. I just put probably about a teaspoon or two of oil. Use my little paper towel and just rub it all around in the bowl. It still has a little bit of bread dough in there, but that's not a problem whatsoever. So we want to get good and oiled up. And I'm going to go ahead and put just a little bit more, because I don't want it to stick. So it doesn't look the prettiest because it does have a little bit of bread, but there's no need in washing this bowl. Just keep on rolling with it. Okay, so we're going to set the bowl aside while we knead the bread. And it says to knead the bread about, let's see, where did I see it? About 5 to 7 minutes, depending on your strength and how well you know how to knead bread. Mine is probably going to need to go maybe 3 to 5 minutes. So I am actually going to set my timer for 3 to 5 minutes and just work on this dough and show you why homesteaders and housewives have really strong arms, because you really want to work with this dough so that all of the yeast is incorporated into your flour and the water, and all your yeast is activated. When you knead the bread, it makes the air go into the bread, and it adds to the function of the yeast so that the bread can rise right. Occasionally you do want to keep adding a little flour. Not a whole lot, just enough to keep it from sticking. So I'm just pressing the dough down. It is a stiffer bread. Remember, I did say this was a stiffer bread. Roll one side up, roll the other side up, pull this over, and then roll it towards you, and then you're going to push it back down. Now, it does take some elbow grease, ladies. And if there's any men interested in doing this, on this one, you have to really work the bread, work the dough. And this is why back in the day, and even in today's time, women spent a lot more time in the kitchen preparing. I've seen it in several of my folk books. In order to have bread every day, you really need to get started early on making your bread, so that you have the time to let the bread rise. They would just sit it by their wood cook stove and let it rise, and it would be warm. Unfortunately, today it's up in the 70s here in the South, so it doesn't really feel like January. But you want to just keep working the dough. So today it should rise with no problem because it's warm here in the house. And that's probably the hardest part about waiting on bread, is waiting for it to rise. Because, I mean, it takes roughly an hour or so, and then another 30 to 45 minutes to let it rise that second time. So it's best to get it started early. Once you bake the bread, it doesn't take that long to bake it, but it's best to go ahead and try to get started on it early, so that if you're planning on using it for part of your supper, then you have it for part of your supper and you have it ready. And then you won't be tempted to go out and buy some buns or something for some sloppy joes or hamburgers. Just kind of get in the habit of making bread. And that is frugal. It saves you a ton of money. And not only does it save you tons of money, it's a lot healthier for you to make your own bread homemade. Yes, it takes some work. Yes, there are days that I don't feel like doing it. But regardless of how I feel, I always feel like trying to eat. So I make myself get up and decide what I'm going to have that day and work on my supper meal. And if it requires bread, like tonight, it's just going to be a simple meal, but it's going to be a delicious meal because it's going to be on some homemade English cottage bread, open face sloppy joes. So even though it's a simple meal, the bread is just going to do the trick. And I'm going to go ahead and let this keep playing because I don't want anyone to think that this is just a quick little fix on kneading the bread. You do really need to knead it for 5 to 7 minutes. It does take a little doing. I know a lot of people skip through a lot of parts, but you know, it takes 5 to 7 minutes. So I think people need to realize that when they see these videos, that yeah, it's nice just to zip through. You know, if some of you already know how to knead bread, then you're not going to be as intrude to sit through 5 to 7 minutes watching me huff and puff and work on this bread. And there goes my timer. So all you have to do is skip past this part, ladies, and just get past that part, and then you can get on with the rest of the video. Very simple, very easy. So now I'm just rolling it up, tucking it under, shaping it into a ball, and I can tell it's already trying to rise up. So I just keep flattening it out, rolling it under, tucking it under, and then flatten that just a little bit so that it all looks nice and smooth. Right, we got our bowl right here. You want to set it in upside down and then flip it back over so that there's a little bit of oil on top of your bread. And then you want to set this in a warm spot out of any drafty areas so that the dough can be warm and rise. Go ahead and cover it up with a towel or a flour sack. Curtain, listen to me. A flour towel, cheesecloth, something. Cover it up, tuck it under, and set your timer for 1 hour. And you're going to let it rise until it's doubled in size. And I'll be back to show you what that looks like. Alright, it has been an hour, and we are ready to check on our dough to see how it has risen. My timer is probably going to go off. I'm a little bit early. I know it's ready. It has doubled in size. Looks really, really good. Now we're just going to punch it down. Let me grab my flour and we can do the next step. Right, we just want to lightly flour our surface again. And the dough is much softer than it was before. We do not need our bowl anymore. So we're just going to lightly knead it just a little bit. And I feel like that's probably good enough. Alright, I kind of make my bread a little bit oblong looking at this point. And now I'm going to show you the next step. This recipe for the English cottage bread makes 2 medium round loaves. So you just want to cut it in half as even as you can. And then this is kind of weird. It says to cut off just a little bit of the end on each half. So I'm going to cut that one, slide it over. I'm going to cut this one and slide it over. So those go together and those go together. Now we're just going to flatten this back out. I'm going to roll the ends under. Let me give myself a little more room here. Get out the rolling pin. Add a little flour. Now I'm just going to roll this out and to make it round circles as best as I can. I'm thinking maybe like 8-inch round or so. It doesn't really specifically say on that part. Just make sure that it's not bigger than your pan that you plan on baking it in, which is going to be a shallow cookie sheet. That way you can get both of your rounds on your pan. I have my pan right here. I'm going to have to just transfer it over here. I'll show y'all that in a second. Okay, let's work on our other big piece. Same thing, tuck it under, kind of flatten it out, make it look smooth. Okay, now we're just going to roll this one out as well. Okay, that looks pretty close. Make sure my edges look right. Not thicker than the rest of my bread. I think that looks pretty close. Not completely round, but you can just stretch it a little bit. Okay, now we have our two little ends. It says to do the same thing with those. To flatten it out, make a ball. I'm going to make a ball with my hand just because it's easier. Then I'm going to flatten it out. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my rolling pin. Again, it does not tell you how big to make it. I think I'm going to go for about, I don't know, maybe 6 inches round. Which is what I think looks right. And I think that looks beautiful. And you want to set this right on top of the other bread. And I'll show you in just a second. No worries. I just don't have enough space to do it all right here. Same thing. Gonna make this into a little ball. I'm tucking it under as I'm turning it. The bottom doesn't look as pretty. That's not gonna matter. No one's gonna see it. Go ahead and give it a little flatten out. And I'm gonna do it the same way as the other one. Okay, that one looks about right. Go ahead and pick it up and put it on top of the other bread. Okay, bring this closer. So it says to set it evenly on top of your bread. You do want to leave a little bit of space for your bread to rise. And then the next part is kind of weird. It says to flour your index finger and poke a hole in the middle all the way through both layers. So do that on both of them. Poke it all the way through. Alright, now we're going to cover this again and let it rise for another 30 to 40 minutes until it has bulked up and almost doubled again in size. And then I'll bring you right back and I'll show you the next process for sticking it in the oven. Alrighty, it's time to uncover our bread for the second rise. And I will show you what it looks like. It turned out really, really pretty. We're going to put it in the oven at 400 degrees. Preheat your oven. It needs to be at 400 degrees. And we will let it bake for 30 minutes. And then we will turn the heat down to 375 and let it bake for about another 20 minutes until the loaves are golden brown and they feel hollow when you tap them. And I will bring y'all right back and show y'all what the bread looks like when it comes out the oven. Alright, we have our English cottage bread out the oven. It's been cooling off. So tonight for supper we're going to have homemade English cottage bread with homemade sloppy joe mix or sauce, however you want to say it. I'm going to go ahead and cut one up so we can use it for our supper tonight. And we'll give it a little taste test and see what we think. And you want to cut it sideways, or I don't know if you call it sideways. And if the bread is too stiff on the end pieces, I'm not the best cutter, so it's not near as bad as I'm making it look. Okay, so that was a little bit difficult for me to do. Keep telling everyone my arms give me fits. So I got the electric knife out to make it a little easier. It was cutting good. It was just getting it's a little bit more brown on the bottom, so it was giving me a little bit of trouble. So just cut it whatever thickness your family likes. We're just going to set these on our plate in probably 1 or 2 pieces, and then set the sloppy joe on top of it, open faced. This one cut a little bit better. You bring it closer so y'all can see it. So it's really good bread. It's just was a little bit tough on the end of it. Like I said, my arms give me fits. I usually can cut it with a regular knife, but not so much today. So I'm just going to keep on cutting it up for our supper tonight. Alright, looking really good. You could use this bread for sandwich bread, but it is a little bit of a stiffer bread, so it makes a perfect bread for open-faced sloppy joes. So thanks for joining me today at the Cozy Cottage Homestead. This was the English cottage bread. Go figure, I didn't come up with the name. It was in the book. So, from the Cozy Cottage Homestead, English cottage bread. So farewell, Homestead family, friends, and neighbors from the Cozy Cottage Homestead.